And then thanks, Piano Man Steve. Okay, let's get going. This is Simon Rosenberg, everybody from now Hopium Chronicles. It's great to be with all of you. This is our monthly get together for the broad Hopium community. I spend about 15-20 minutes talking about the current state of our politics, and then we have a robust discussion. And I'm really grateful for all of you being part of this community and being here tonight with me and with all of us. It's been a fun, Hopium has been a really fun journey, and I'm just grateful that you're all along for the ride. Listen, I often start these presentations by going back and reminding everybody what happened in 2022, because it's very instructive about where we are right now. In 2022, we had a terrific election. It was the third straight strong election for the Democrats after Trump became known as MAGA. And in 2022, we, Tom Bonnier and I started seeing these trends after Dobbs, where we saw heightened Democratic performance in House special elections all across the country. We saw increased, the voter registration turned much more Democrat. Our candidates outraised Republican candidates by 4 to 5 to 1 in the battlegrounds. And then we saw this intensity carry on to the early vote that happened, where we outperformed our early vote numbers. We outperformed 2018 and 2020 and 2022, despite it being a worse election for us. And we saw all this Democratic intensity when it really mattered post-Dobbs. And we speculated that, based on this, that we would have a better election than many thought. And thankfully, we did. We gained ground in Arizona, Colorado, Georgia, Michigan, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, and New Hampshire. We got to 59% in Colorado, 57% in Pennsylvania, 55% in Michigan, 54% in New Hampshire. Those would be amazing results in a good year. And we were doing this in what was supposed to be a bad year with high inflation, low Biden approval. And so in the battleground states, the country actually moved and became more Democratic. And I think it's why, for Trump or whoever the Republican nominee is, the battleground's gotten harder. The hill to climb has gotten higher because of our third straight consecutive strong performance in the battleground states. But where we didn't run these big muscular campaigns, where, in California, New York, Texas, and Florida, we fell back a little bit. And the admonition to that is that, where we do build these big campaigns, we can control the information environment. We can push turnout to the upper end of what's possible and push our performance to the upper end of what's possible, which is what happened in 2022. But where we don't, the Republicans still are very loud and can still control the information environment. And that's why, heading into 2023, what I talked about from the early days of Hopium is that we not only have to just do the work in campaigns and keep doing it, and all the postcards and the donating of money and the texting and the phone calling that you're all, and canvassing that all of you are doing, it really matters. And we're kicking ass in elections. And I'll get to that about 2023 in a second. But we also have to develop this other muscle, what I call becoming an information warrior for our democracy. And we have to help close what I call the loudness gap. They're much louder than we are, and we have to close that gap. And we'll come back to that in a minute. That was part of the big takeaway for me coming out of 2022. But that basic environment that we left at the end of 2022 has now carried over into 2023. And we now have data after many months of elections all across the country that in the Daily Coast tracker of special elections, we're now running 7.6% above 2020. In the House specials in 2022, we ran 7% higher than 2020. So we're actually doing better in these special elections than we did in many special elections in 2022, which was a really good election for us. Remember, Joe Biden won the election by 4.5 points in 2020. And in these special elections, we're running 8 points ahead in many of these districts. And by the way, very different races all across the country, different states. We also know that we won Wisconsin with 56% of the vote, amazing performance. We took away Jacksonville, Florida, and Colorado Springs, two traditionally Republican cities. We ran up the score in Ohio and got all the way up to 57% in Ohio. So in every type of election, mayoral races, Supreme Court races, ballot initiatives, state house races, state senate races, we are performing at the upper end of what's possible here. And it's why, to me, that's the most important data that we have about where things are, not a single bad national poll, but this continued performance of Democrats, heightened performance, elevated performance of Democrats in real elections when our coalition needed to show up. I think part of what's happening in national polling now is that there's something I call asymmetrical engagement, where the Republican coalition's engaged. They have a primary going on. There are ads being run. And importantly, their leader is being challenged, potentially jailed, by the current legal system. And so if you're a marginal Republican voter, you have a reason to be engaged right now, whereas the Democratic coalition doesn't have any reason to be engaged at the national level, right, at the presidential level. And that's why I think you're seeing a little bit of softness in our numbers now. Joe Biden's at 45, 46% of the vote. He got 51 last time. And so when you see people say, well, the Democratic coalition is a little weak and wobbly right now, it is. It's because there's no election happening on our side. The Biden campaign is just starting to turn on. There isn't a primary election. There's no reason for a marginal Democrat to be engaged in the presidential conversation. And it doesn't really matter, because where our coalition has needed to show up last year, this year, it has in extraordinary numbers. And so I feel really good about where things are. I think the second thing that I want to say about national polling is that national polling is having, as we saw last year, a hard time of capturing what's happening in American politics right now. If states are moving in different directions, if some states are moving towards the Democrats and other states are moving towards the Republicans, national polling can't capture that. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of the national analysts didn't really see what was happening in the election in 2022. And so to me, I think what's more valuable is to look at higher quality, large sample polls of smaller cohorts, either demography or states. And I think we're going to get a much clearer picture about the state of things than a single national poll. And there have been two of those in the last week. There was a poll in New Hampshire, very large sample, very high quality CNN poll, that had Biden beating Trump by 12 points, 52-40. Biden won New Hampshire last time by 7. So that's 5 points above his 2020 numbers. That's very similar, right, to the numbers that we're seeing all across the country. And then the second poll was released today by Univision, a large sample poll, bilingual poll, high quality, of Hispanic voters, which showed Biden up by 27 points. Which is a place that I'll take. I think that's a good number. By certain measures, it's above 2020. By other measures, it's a little below 2020. But it destroys the argument that there's some kind of structural collapse going on with Democrats and Hispanics, which, by the way, didn't show up in 2022. Everyone sort of forgot about that. We actually did very well with Hispanic voters in 2022. And so that number plus 27, my view is that we need to win Hispanics in 2024 by 30 points. He's plus 27 before our coalition is engaged. So I'll take that number. I think that's exactly where we want to be. And that's my basic story that I want to tell all of you tonight, which is that I think where we want to be right now. I would much rather be us than them. The data in the elections is incredibly encouraging. Our fundraising is not down. It's actually up from 2019 at this point, even though we don't have a presidential primary. There's some bad information spreading through the Democratic world right now that our fundraising is way off. That's not true. We're actually running substantially above where we were in 2019 at this point. We also know that as you project forward to next year, there's this basic, simple reality that Joe Biden has been a good president. The country's better off. And the Democratic Party is strong. Our grassroots that many of you are part of is making our party stronger than it's been in decades, maybe ever right now, given how much money we're raising and the volunteerism that we're seeing. And all of you are doing an amazing job at helping push our performance to the upper end of what's possible. What are they going to be selling next year? They're going to be selling Donald Trump. I don't know about you, man, but as a political strategist, I have no idea how you put lipstick on that pig. I have no idea how you turn Donald Trump into a serious and legitimate presidential candidate. And so it's my hope and my belief that we have the opportunity next year, not just to win as we did last time by 4.5 points, but to win big, to try to get up into the high single digits, to win even by 10 points, as I call it, get to 55, because I think they're abandoning space that we can take away from them. And that's not just hypothetical, that's actually already happened. We took away Wisconsin, we took away Jacksonville, we took away Colorado Springs, right? We're taking stuff away from them that was theirs. We're growing, we're expanding geographically and demographically. This is really important. And so I think that our goal should be not just to win next year, but to win big, to make this election a clear repudiation of MAGA, to start to loosen the dark grip of MAGA on the Republican Party, and which would not only be good for the country and good for us as Democrats, I think it would be good for the Republican Party itself. And I think that one of the most important, I'm going to address now two things that come up in all of our conversations. But Simon, what about Biden's age? Here's how I view Biden's age. Age is not just a liability. It's also there's the balance sheet. There's assets and liabilities with age. We know the liabilities. The assets is that with age, as somebody who's formerly young, I know that comes wisdom, experience, and capability. And it's impossible to unpack Biden's success as president from the fact that he was the most experienced person to ever go into the White House in the history of the country. It may be that we're blessed to have had the most experienced person to ever go into the White House in a time of insurrection and COVID and the aggression from Russia and Ukraine. These are hard, difficult things that he's had to manage, and we've come out of all of this very well. And so to me, his age is both an asset and a liability. We shouldn't run away from it. It's an issue in the election, but I think we have a good story to tell, and we should tell it. And then finally, on the various third-party splinter groups, rogue party efforts, I want to remind everybody that there is already one very powerful and important sort of splinter group, rogue party effort underway in the United States that's played a major role in our recent elections, and that's the Never Trumper, Never MAGA Republicans. Lincoln Project, Bulwark, Liz Cheney, Bill Kristol, hundreds and hundreds of Republican elected officials across the country. They've created a permission structure that's been really important to our recent success, that's allowed Republicans to not vote Republican temporarily, maybe forever, we'll see, right? But they've already played a major role. And so when you talk about the third-party efforts that are underway, Cornel West and No Labels, I think you have to remind everybody that there is already one of these efforts underway, and it's been really good for us and really bad for them, and it's probably going to be stronger and more capable in 2024 than it even was in 2022 and 2020. Imagine if Liz Cheney endorses Joe Biden and campaigns with him all around the country. It could make a huge difference in the election. I'm not dismissing the importance of Cornel West or No Labels or Robert Kennedy, but I also don't think we should make them into things that are more powerful than they are. None of them are serious campaign. None of them are serious. None of them can seriously challenge for the presidency. They're all vanity runs by people at the end of their careers. And we should work really hard to diminish them and belittle them and make them small and not make them powerful. I don't like the way we've been talking about a lot of these efforts. I think we've made them into something that's more powerful than they really are. In the very first national poll where Joe Manchin was tested by name, he was at 2% nationally. And so I don't know that any of these things are going to amount to anything serious. And if we win by 10 points, certainly they don't have the ability to influence the outcome of the election. I'm not dismissing this, but I'm talking about tactics, not strategy. They matter, but it's a question about how we handle them. And I think our goal should be to ignore them, to make them small and not big. I don't think that, and to not let them, and not to give them power that they don't have and that they can't earn on their own. It's really important. And then finally, I want to pitch Virginia. There are incredibly important elections all over the country in November. We've had a great run, but let's just be clear. The Virginia races are going to matter more than the other ones in the national narrative, and they may matter much more in the presidential election next year. If we can flip the House in Virginia and keep the Senate, it will do enormous damage to Glenn Youngkin in whatever role he may play someday in the Republican Party, whether in this election, becoming the vice president for Donald Trump, or eventually replacing Trump if he falters in sometime next year. We need to not just do the right thing for Virginia and make sure that this remarkable state that's been ably led for so many years and has become a reliably blue state, the last state in the South where abortion is legal, the stakes in this are unbelievably high. And I'm asking everyone in the Hopium community to take some action on behalf of Virginia. Early voting has already begun. You can make calls and make text and do your text and do your postcards and canvas and give money right now. I've put lots of material on our site, on the Hopium site, for how to best do that. And I think it's really important that I'm asking, imploring, begging, whatever the right word is, that all of you take action and do it as soon as you can. It's important what we learned last time in 2022, that moving our early voters and getting them to vote early helps end up increasing turnout overall. Because when you get early voters to vote, the campaign can then move on to lower propensity voters, people who don't vote as much. The earlier we start talking to earlier propensity voters, the bigger our turnout gets. It's very simple. And so if you live in Virginia, vote as soon as you can. If you're going to take action in Virginia, do it as soon as you can. It matters more to do it this week than in 3 weeks. The impact is greater, because moving these early, what they call prime voters, into and taking them off the vote, taking them off the GOTV list, means we're not spending money and time contacting them. And all of that money and time can be spent on contacting lower propensity voters. It's one of the reasons we did so well in the last election, is that our early vote performance was extraordinary all across the country, largely because of the work that many of you do. So that's my thought. I feel really, to be honest, I feel good about where we are. I think Joe Biden's been a good president. The country's better off. The Democratic Party is strong. We keep winning elections all across the country. And what do they have? They have Trump, right? So I think, I'll take that. And I think that I'd much rather be us than them as we head into 2024. And thank you all for being here tonight. Those are my opening thoughts. I'm going to open it up. I'm going to take some questions first from the Q&A. And yeah, Steve raised this question about this narrative that I have been pushing about. We need to be expanding the aperture of the data that we're looking at. We need to look at more data, as Tom and I did last year, to look at these elections. And today, the New York Times had a piece by Reed Epstein, who I've spoken to about this issue over the last few months, saying that, hey, Joe Biden's not doing so well, but the Democratic Party is winning elections all across the country. And that was, to me, the beginning of the national media sort of having a red wavy kind of moment where they had to sort of start to acknowledge that there's a lot of data out there showing that Democrats aren't struggling and aren't weak, but that we're really strong. And so I think we're beginning to break through in that. And I also want to give a lot of credit to Lawrence O'Donnell and Joy Reid and Chris Hayes on MSNBC, who were early on this story and have been talking about it nightly on national television, which I think has also really helped, influence the national chatter about all this. I also want to raise one other thing that I'm at Hopium Cavalry instead of the grassroots. I want to just raise one other thing that is something that I'm going to begin talking about more than I have, which is this whole question about the Democrats' fear, uncertainty, doubt, and I want everyone to recognize that the way that a lot of Democratic fundraising happens, where they come to you and to wealthy Americans to give them money, is they argue that things are bad, that the Hispanic vote is down, that youth aren't turning out, or that we're not, that a poll here or there is not doing so well. And because of this vast fundraising apparatus that exists in our family, there becomes a basic bias into, I think, overstating our struggles in the daily discourse to raise money and to sort of create urgency, around struggle. And I think that, one, we have to recognize that's part of the discourse that we're all part of, that there's a lot of people telling us that actually things are not going well because they need to raise money to do that. But the second thing is that I disagree with them about how to raise money. I think people want to support things that are working, not things that are not working. I think it's anyone who's done investment in the private world knows that, you can't get investment in a company that's not working. You get investment in companies that are working and that are succeeding. And that I think, have approached a lot of this backwards. And that in a time when things are actually working, when we're kicking ass, when we're doing really well, we should then talk about using that success and creating more of it, expansion, growing the coalition, taking away real estate. And it's one of the reasons why I think that many of you, particularly if you are very active in progressive communities, and particularly 501c3 and C4 organizations, that they are relentlessly telling you how terrible everything is. And they're just wrong. You know, it's a serious problem that we have to sort of air out in the family. And my challenge is that I think we have to readjust our thinking about this, that at this point, trying to argue that the Democratic Party is in trouble and everything is struggle and the coalitions aren't coming together is just misleading based on our actual performance over this past year and a half. And I think the way we have to rejigger this is to start, as I was saying, to say we're kicking ass. We can win this election by a lot. We can end the dark grip of MAGA and the Republicans. We can grow our coalition. I think that's a much more attractive offering to voters, to donors, to people who are going to go out and canvass and do the work. And so we've got to, I think, change the way that we view these things. You know that I took the hopium label because I do think it is critical that we learn how to respond to the negative sentiment in our discourse with much more positive sentiment in our discourse. We have to become intentional about it, because part of the strategy of MAGA is to flood our discourse every day with negative sentiment. They want us to feel bad about our country, our institutions, our leaders, each other, everything. And we have to recognize that part of the way we defeat MAGA is by being much more intentional about putting positive information into our daily discourse every day, by responding to when they talk down America, we have to talk it up. I mean, all of you are here because you love your country and you don't want to let your democracy slip away. Well, one of the ways we do that is by, talking up our country, talking up our president, talking up our party. And what I'd like to say is that, it's my advice that in your engagement with the outside world and your networks, try to keep about 2/3 of your communications positive and 1/3 what we call contrast. I think that there's too much. I joke that I don't ever want to see another image of Marjorie Taylor Greene or hear about her latest escapades. What's the point of that? People shouldn't be sharing that stuff anymore. We have to do a better job at ignoring them and not allowing their craziness to sort of become our craziness. I've always felt that there was a line in politics I learned as a young guy that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And we have to become more indifferent to them. It doesn't mean we ignore them and pretend they're not there, but I think we spend too much time talking about them and not enough time talking about us. And this is a really important kind of way that I think we have to reorient our thinking about our politics and how we win going forward. Alan Greenberg asked that, what can be done for the red states that seem so lost? He lives in Texas. Look, all you can do is make progress. All you can do is keep making progress. Texas, for example, Joe Biden only lost Texas, I think, by 4.5 points. And, Beto got very close in 2018, not last time. And I think one of the things we know about Texas is that Abbott has been a remarkably strong candidate when he's run. But when he's not been on the ballot, we've done much better. And I think that Trump's anti-Mexico, anti-Hispanic, anti-border message doesn't play well in Texas. And it hasn't played well. I mean, his performance in both 2016 and 2020 was not great. So all we can do is take that step every day. And as I said earlier, I think we have more agency and power in influencing the daily discourse than we understand. And I tell this, I do a joke, which is based on the power invested in me by my dog Tug, who's up here over my camera right but left shoulder. Tug, my English bulldog. I am giving you permission to become an information warrior. I'm asking you to spend more time spreading positive information through your networks. And if we do this, we can reach tens of millions of people together every day. And that matters. It all matters. I tell the story that, to me, the most rewarding part of hopium is not just being in community with all of you and working together with all of you to make sure freedom and democracy prevail here and everywhere. But just recently, I think it was Irene, and I'm forgetting her name, but she told a story on our chat in Hopium about how she'd gone to dinner with three friends, and they started dumping on Biden and his age and everything else, and she used the arguments that we talk about here. And by the end of the dinner, they'd all come around and said Joe Biden's been a good president. Well, imagine if 1 million people are doing that every day, right? And so don't think that those kinds of little incidental moments where you can persuade, yes, Democrats, right? But that positive energy you're creating, that sense that then they're going to go tell three of their friends and convert three of their friends, it creates this ripple effect. We have to be networked together and amplify each other. It's what the right has done. Donald Trump built an amplification machine in the 2016 election. It was part of what Russia actually taught him to do during the social media intervention by the Russian government in the 2016 election, stuff they had done in other countries. And they have an amplified set of millions of Americans who amplify the Trump tweets and other things every day. We don't. And so rather than waiting for Joe Biden to ask you or the DNC to ask you, I'm giving you permission to go do it. And just do it in whatever way is comfortable for you. There's no right or wrong. There's no, and what I've often said is that what should you be communicating every day? I think rather than mimicking talking points that you don't necessarily know and understand, I would pick an issue, whether it's reproductive health or the economy, healthcare, climate, that really matters to you. And do a little homework, get smart about it, right? Don't let other people write your talking points for you. Develop your own connection to the material, and that knowledge, coupled with the passion that you have for the issue, will make you a very powerful information warrior. I don't know that us continuing to spread, the same talking points all around networks is the best way for us to do this work together. I think passion really matters. I think that you become persuasive when you're passionate and when it really sounds like it comes from you. And so do whatever you think is most useful, but don't forego the notion that you can become, stick on a single issue and keep returning to it and educating your community about something, whether it, whatever issue it is. But certainly I think if I could choose, to me, what you've all heard me say since the beginning of the year is where we must be in a better place by the spring is on the economy. We're not where we want to be. It's going to be the number one or number two issue in the election. And Joe Biden has done a good job. The Democratic Party's done a good job on the economy over a long period of time. And we shouldn't accept that they're ahead of us on economic issues. We have to change that. And if you look at all the early Biden ads, they're almost all about the economy. They have launched a very significant buy this month in the battlegrounds. The ads are good. I'm really pleased. I think they're in the zone. I think they know what they have to do here. And I think they've started to turn the campaign on. And I think it's really important. I've talked to the DNC today about the need for them to make these ads more accessible to everybody so you can spread them through your networks as well. And so that they're on YouTube, they're easily accessible, they're shared not just on television, but through social media and through email. We've got to give all of you more powerful tools. And what I often get asked about is, well, what should I be saying, Simon? What are my talking points? At the end of the day, the talking points and the message is going to come from Joe Biden and his campaign. So the closer you get connected to that, what they're saying, which is all market tested up the wazoo, right? They've spent huge amounts of money in testing ads and testing messages before they go out. If you want to stay close to Biden and his campaign and to the super PAC Future Forward for where you get your cues about how to approach things. I'm sorry, my throat. This is my third event. My throat's a little gone. Hold on. Let me just go into the chat and see if I can take on a few messages. Yeah, look, I mean, I'm seeing a bunch of questions. I mean, let me just try to summarize them. These are all the kind of things that I appreciate the chat and hear everybody. Look, I think the Bob Menendez issue is inconsequential. The Democrats have denounced him. I think he's going to run for re-election. I don't think it's an issue that's going to amount to very much. And I don't think people should get worried about it. I don't get distracted. There's nothing we can do about it. And there is going to be a primary. It looks like now Andy Kim, if Andy Kim is the only candidate, will beat Bob, in my view, in the primary. And then we'll have the example of us having a rogue, person getting beaten in a Republican primary instead of a rogue candidate being at 60%. I mean, in a Democratic primary, as opposed to Donald Trump, who just today a judge announced that he and his family had committed serial fraud over many years and disbanded all of his businesses in New York City. This happened late this afternoon in New York State, late this afternoon, including the Trump organization. That candidate who has done all these awful things is over 50% in the Republican primary. In our case, we're going to have a case where the party is rallying to try to push this candidate out of the race. And I think that contrast between us saying no to Bob Menendez and the Republicans saying yes to Donald Trump will be an important contrast for us as we go forward. I do want to say one other thing that I haven't written about very much that I think is actually really important, which is the latest news about Clarence Thomas's corruption. And I think there's a general view in most people that like everybody's corrupt in Washington, and it's just everyone's taking stuff under the table and it's kind of business as usual. And first of all, that's not true. I mean, we have far less corruption in our political system than many, because so much is out in the open and is reportable, and we know about what's happening. And I think we've done, with the exception of the unlimited soft money, our campaign finance system is actually reasonably intelligent and thoughtful and smart. But what Clarence Thomas did, which came out last week, wasn't him taking a trip with some guy to go on vacation. It wasn't him, going to speak at a university where there were fancy dinners for him and they flew him out on a jet. It wasn't him speaking at a conservative legal conference where you could sort of say that he was still acting impartially because this was a nonprofit. He went to more than once to the fundraising retreat for the Koch family. The Koch family is arguably the most powerful political and campaign organization in the United States. They raise and spend money to elect Republicans over Democrats. This would be like him going to an RNC meeting. And what's worse is that he then, on an issue that dramatically and directly affected the Koch political entity, he voted in a court case to allow them to keep their operations and their donors private and not public, meaning that he went and supported this organization, this partisan political organization, by attending their fundraising event, which is a form of support of that political objective, Republicans winning elections. And then he in what was a clear conflict of interest, voted to allow them to keep their activities from the public. I can't tell you, to me, this is a major moment in the evolution of this stuff with Clarence Thomas. It's not another moment, right? This is a huge thing. And John Roberts now is faced with a very serious matter. We know that Donald Trump has tried to destroy virtually every institution of our democracy. John Roberts is destroying the Supreme Court right now. And he's a coward. He's a terrible coward. And he's going to go down in history as one of the great malevolent Republican figures of this dark MAGA period. And I think now the question, what happened in the last 10 days, is the question of whether or not the Roberts court, not Clarence Thomas, is corrupt, has been settled. We know it is. And John Roberts, if he doesn't do something meaningful and significant soon to start to alter the ability for this kind of activity to happen, he should resign. He should step down, because it's not about Clarence Thomas anymore. It's about him. It's about this permissive environment that he's allowed to happen, where rank and unbelievable corruption has taken place. And by the way, the things that Clarence Thomas has done would not be legal or possible for any other judge or any other elected official, including the President of the United States, in the entire country. We're talking about activity that is prohibited for every other person who's an elected official or government employee in the entire United States. So we're really talking about an historic betrayal of trust. I want to work with all of you to help explain all this to our family a little bit more, because this is something that is now, we're in a place that's beyond the pale. This is something that is so extraordinary and so ridiculous that John Roberts is not taking steps to discipline Clarence Thomas, or Republicans, or more Republicans have called on Bob Menendez to resign than for Clarence Thomas to resign. And Clarence Thomas's corruption, I want to say this, Clarence Thomas may be the most corrupt elected official, corrupt political official in the history of the United States. It is impossible for virtually any other political figure to be this corrupt, because the laws would have caught them. But because the Supreme Court justices are completely outside of the law and outside of any kind of ethical bindings, he's been allowed to get away with things that no one else could get away with. And I think we will come to know what happened with Clarence Thomas in the Roberts Court 10 years from now, 15 years from now, as among the darkest moments of this dark period. And I'm going to be doing more to help explain all this to everybody, because it's an unbelievable betrayal of the country, and another sign that the problems that Republicans have aren't limited to Trump, that MAGA and the current Republican contempt for democracy and for the rules and norms and laws of democracy, and the sort of descent into illiberalism, is far broader and more pervasive than just Donald Trump. We're seeing it play out in North Carolina and in Wisconsin right now, where we have two states that can't any longer be categorized as democracies because of the extremism of the Republicans in those states. This illiberalism, this contempt for democracy, this unwilling to adhere to the things that have made America great since the 18th century, has now become essentially the most common play in the Republican playbook. And we have to figure out a way together to talk to the American people about this, next year. Let me just go on to, let me just try to see if there are sort of, John asked a question about, is the performance in these special elections predictive? Nothing's predictive in our business. Polling's not predictive. The weather's not predictive. Inflation's not predictive. It's just data. And in last cycle, as I already went through in my explanation, all this data was pointing in the same direction, which is heightened Democratic intensity based on the frustration and anger and fear of MAGA through Dobbs, through their contempt for democracy. And we're saying all that play out again this year. I want to be very clear that the data I'm citing is dozens of elections all across the country, mayoral elections, and Supreme Court elections, ballot initiatives. We're seeing the same trend line across the whole country. Will that change by 13 months from now? Of course it can, but it will have to be changed by something, right? It's not going to just dissipate, which was sort of the narrative in 2022. We've had the same basic political reality in America since Dobbs. It's the continuation of this sort of political structure. I don't know what the Republicans are going to be able to do to alter that, because the most powerful force in our politics in the last three elections has been fear and opposition to MAGA. And in 2024, MAGA is going to be even worse than it's been in the previous elections. I don't know that they have the power to change and alter the trajectory of the election right now that we've seen. So, nothing's predictive in our business. No one can predict the future, right? That's not possible. But you can make reasonable guesses based on the data you have and based on my experience of doing this for 30 years. And right now, the Republican Party is in deep shit, and we're kicking their ass all over the country. And the bottom line is, is that somehow not good? Of course, it's amazing. It's incredible. Congratulations, everybody, right? We're doing really well. Will we be exactly where we are? If the election were held today, I think Joe Biden would win the election by a huge margin based on this data. But the election isn't today, and we've got a lot of work to do in the next 13 months to make this the election that we want it to be, because we want to not just win the presidency, we want to keep the Senate and win the House back and have, total control of the federal government, again, in 2025. I think that has to be our, our hope and aspiration. Let me just see if I can take, look, I think Kamala, I'm glad somebody raised that. Kamala, and I want to say one other thing about John's question is that I just generally believe that the data about previous elections, first of all, no election is like any other election. And one of the reasons that so many people got 2022 wrong was they were saying it was like 2010 or 2014. Every election's unique and sui generis, and you have to look at the data that's in front of you. The most important data about this election is the election that's happening, the elections that are happening this year, and whether there's any kind of big trends. And the second thing about that is that I think that our politics fundamentally changed during the 2021 and 2022 cycle. The Republicans did two things that each of which could keep them out of power for decades. First is they tried to overturn an American election and end American democracy for all time. And the second was Dobbs and the stripping of rights for a majority of the population in the United States. In my view, either one of those things could be enough to keep them out of power for a very long time. And they did two of them. And I think that the country, while they're aware of Republican illiberalism, I don't think they're really aware that the effort to overturn the election and end American democracy was something that was done by hundreds of Republican leaders all across the country, including the RNC chair, including Lindsey Graham, including Rudy Giuliani and dozens of others. That establishment of that conspiracy, that this was a conspiracy of hundreds of people to end American democracy for all time, and that it was led by the Republican Party itself, not by a bunch of guys sitting in the White House. That understanding, I'm willing to bet, is not well understood. And that up until just a few weeks ago, the government of the United States had not established that fact or asserted that fact that there was this party-wide conspiracy to end American democracy. And it's my view that we're going to have more tools to bludgeon the Republicans, to push them away from the electorate than set of people have had in modern American history. And we also have the counter to that, which is that Joe Biden's been a good president. The country's better off. He's made these far-sighted investments that are going to keep us, that will encourage American prosperity, broad-based prosperity for a generation to come, made us a leader in climate change, again, all around the world. These three big bills that Biden passed were only just beginning to sort of come to understanding. I think the American people are just beginning to feel the impact of them. And so as a strategist, look at my pieces and look at their pieces in the game, right? We have really strong pieces. Like I can see the board and I can see us winning. I don't see how they win. I just don't see it. I mean, it would take something extraordinary at this point, in my view, and extraordinary things can happen, but that doesn't mean they're likely. I mean, a meteor could hit the earth tomorrow. It doesn't mean that it's likely to happen. But getting to that issue about extraordinary things is Kamala, the vice president. It's very clear that the administration is allowing her to play a much more aggressive and ambitious role as vice president than she had been over the first 2 years. She's now doing foreign trips. She's meeting with foreign leaders. She's running now important aspects of the government. She's speaking in public far more. They're helping her become a better vice president, a more effective vice president, a more confident vice president, which is what the Biden team needs to be doing, because she is the vice president. And the vice president is there in case anything happens to the president. And I think holding her back, which I think, frankly, Team Biden did a little bit in 21 and 22, was not helpful to her or the country. And so I'm really heartened by the vice president that we're seeing right now. She seems much more confident and capable and aggressive and ambitious than she had been. And I think that's important, because the whole reason the vice president's there, we don't have to dance around this. The reason the position was constructed was because in case anything happened to the president. This is not a secret. And it's important that we're doing everything we can to make sure that she's ready for that eventuality if it terribly, tragically were to come. And I think we're seeing that happen now. And I think she's responding well to it. You can tell that she feels good about her thing now, and that, she's getting to do the job which she was elected to do. And I think it's been terrific. And I think you can see it in her face, you can see it in her body energy. She is taking it, she's enjoying this job now, and she's working really, really hard. The I want to mention, Sharon has mentioned about gerrymandered, and about Heather Cox Richardson, who I'm a big fan. She's a new book coming out this week. I think it's certainly everyone who is a fan of hers needs to buy it. I think there's some confusion in our family about gerrymandering and about how gerrymandering works. Gerrymandering can't affect a statewide race, right? It can't affect a Senate race or a governor's race or the presidential race. It affects the way that districts in the states are drawn. And there's no question that we had a bad 2010 in the census comes every 10 years, and then every single district in the states and for Congress are redrawn, not in the Senate, right? In the US Senate, because they're statewide, but in the House, and then in the states, in the state legislatures, they get redrawn. And what happened in 2010 after the census was that we had a bad redistricting across the country. And I'm not going to go into what happened and why it happened, but we stumbled a little bit. And they ran up the score in places like Ohio and North Carolina and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Michigan. And we've had to slowly claw our way back, and get back. And in some of these states, we've had enormous victories. In Pennsylvania and Michigan, for example, we now control the state houses in those states, and we've clawed our way out of the really, bad hole that we dug ourselves in 2010. But there are a couple of states where that hasn't happened, right? In North Carolina and in Wisconsin, where in Ohio, Texas, Florida, where Republicans are acting in a way that is outside of any understanding of how a democracy can operate, and are acting, whatever word you want to use, authoritarian, illiberal, anti-democratic. They're doing things that are making it clear that their intention is to make those states no longer a democracy, where their party gets to choose the leaders of the state and not the voters. This is a major thing. And it's one of the reasons why I tell everyone that, if you are part of an organization and you're looking about where you're going to participate in the presidential election, I want to encourage everyone to make North Carolina their number one choice. And to me, it's because it's our most important expansion state. We haven't been winning there. I've looked at private and public polling. We can win there in 2024. The Republican gubernatorial nominee is going to be one of the craziest MAGA candidates we've all ever seen. And so the ugliness of MAGA is going to be all over the ballot in 2024. We have a very competent and capable gubernatorial nominee, Josh Stein, in 2024. But it's a state where we've been underperforming and where we need to do better. And it's also a state, because of that underperformance, the Republicans essentially have taken democracy away from the people of North Carolina. And so I have a powerful kind of emotional connection to North Carolina right now, and feel that, if I had 5 cents and I could only put it somewhere in 2024, I'd put it into North Carolina. If I could only make 100 presidential phone calls, I'd make them in North Carolina. And I think it's really important. And I think, look, we have strong governors in many of the battleground states now. We've been winning elections there. That's not true in North Carolina, right? The gubernatorial race is on the ballot this time. It's unusual. Most of the other states, we have Josh Shapiro and Gretchen Whitmer and Katie Hobbs and other, Democratic governors in these battleground states. We don't, we have an election for governor in North Carolina. But once you start hearing and learning about their candidate for governor, you're going to realize that amazingly, this state that is a swing state will have nominated, somebody who is among the craziest MAGA candidates we've all ever seen. And that's why I think this is the year in North Carolina. We got to get this done. It's really important. Let me just see if I can. So on the question about, I just want to say one thing is that, and and I'm going to address this more formally at some point, but Rui Teixeira, who has a new book out, who is an old colleague of mine, is wrong about virtually everything that he's saying right now. And I'm going to engage this in a more, formal way. I mean, his book is basically titled "Why Are Democrats Losing Votes?" And I've just explained to you that we're kicking ass and that we've had the best presidential run that we've had since the 1930s and 40s. And, like, we're winning, we're not losing, right? The party is not falling apart. We're actually united and we're very strong right now. And I don't want to, I have a lot of respect for Rui, and he is a very smart guy, but his current analysis of our politics is wrong. And I implicitly, a lot of what I do is, is material to rebut his argument and his narrative. I mean, we've done better with young people in these last few elections, and we've been kicking ass with young people in recent elections. And so I just want to remind everybody that, please, when you come into Hopium and you enter our space, that this is a space where the assumption is that right now, Joe Biden's been a good president, the country is better off, the Democratic Party is strong, we are likely to win the election next year. We have a very powerful argument to make about what we've done that's made the country better. We've made far-sighted investments that are going to potentially make the country prosperous and move ahead for 25 years. And they've arguably done more to undermine America and the liberal global order, our fundamental rights, our democracy, than any group of people in the history of the United States. And we have to, I think, stop immediately going to this place of worry. But Simon, I'm worried about this. Simon, I'm worried about this. I'm concerned about this. All those concerns are on the margins of our politics. The stuff we have to stay focused on, the stuff that matters, is the stuff that I just went through. Us being strong, us being aggressive, us winning elections all over the country. I've been very honest. I'm not, being Pollyannish here. I'm reading the data. I'm amazed at the data. I still am stunned with how well we're doing all across the country. I've also been very honest that we're not where we want to be on the economy, for example. I've shown you the data. I've made it very clear this is a problem that we have to address, but it's an addressable problem. It's not a worry. It's not a concern. It's that we understand that there's something we need to do there and we have the power to go do it. Worry and concern gives up your power to other people, right? And I think that I just want to encourage all of you to not be worried and concerned, right? To be strategic, but when you are worried and concerned, what you have to do with it is you have to channel it into activity and it's part of the reason that I built Hopium. I mean, I'm concerned deeply about what's happening to my country. And I wanted to make sure that I went to bed every night knowing that I did everything I possibly could that day to help move us forward. That's the way you deal with concerns. It isn't by airing them out and taking your anxiety and spreading it all over social networks and the internet. And, that's not helpful, right? What's helpful is, we're all worried. And here's what I did today to address it. Here are the steps I took to advance our democracy. Here's the things that I did. Rather than giving into the worry, I channeled it into action and activity. This is a fundamental thing we have to learn how to do, is not spread our anxiety and our worry to everyone else, but to spread our conviction that we can make things better. Hopium is hope with a plan. We didn't just hope the election got better in 2022. We made it better. We changed the outcome of the election through our collective work together. And it showed the power that we have when we put our heads down, roll up our sleeves, and do the work. We already did that. We showed we can do that. That's the way forward, right? And we have to live in the space of achievement and accomplishment, live less in the space of worry and concern, is my general advice. Let me, so Natalie, send me what you want me to. I'm interested in learning about about your point about why it's critical not to refute what MAGA Republicans say or do. I mean, I agree with that to a point, right? We can't ignore it. I mean, we have to find those moments where we explain that there's still an extraordinary threat, because I think there's incredible normalization bias in our daily discourse. I think the media every day that goes on, they're like a normalization machine that turns this dangerous, illiberal, party into something that seems more like a normal Republican Party. And we can't let them do that. I'm not saying I've made it very clear tonight about my view about this. We can't dwell in all that. We also can't look away, right? We can't look away. We have to remind people when we need to, but it's where our time together and where we share with others should be much more about the things that we've achieved and our success than it is about them. We talk about them too much, and I agree with you in that regard, Natalie. We spend way too much time talking about them. It's like rubbernecking. Sometimes I feel like people are stopping as they're passing a car wreck, right? Well, we have to stop it. We have to. Our biggest job in the next 6 months, in addition to doing all the work in elections, is spending much more of our time talking about our successes and our achievements and not on our failures. I didn't talk much about the government shutdown this week because this is coming up now in questions, because I was just on a call with Hakeem Jeffries and we're hitting time here. I didn't realize it was 8 o'clock. Where he said he feels that the Republicans, that there's a real chance that there could be a deal this weekend. He may be being, that's his public position, but the Republicans don't really have a strong case to make for shutting the government down. They made an agreement with the president and Senate in the summer, and they need to honor it. And they, by them now trying to reopen those negotiations unilaterally, they basically walked away from a deal they struck with the president of the United States and the United States Senate. And it's very hard for them to defend that. And they won't. And McCarthy is openly talking about all the time about how he thinks this will not work out well for the Republicans. And he doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to shut the government down. So let's hope that something good happens, over the next few days. But I also don't think we should be, I think if there is an extended shutdown, I think it will cause even more brand damage. Not only will this be the Republican Party that ended Roe and advanced extremist abortion positions across the country and tried to end American democracy, it will also be the government that will have willy-nilly, it will be the people that willy-nilly inflicted economic harm and hardship onto the American people for shits and giggles, in essence, right? And I think that there's an awareness among the adults in the Republican Party that at this moment, this would be deeply dangerous for them. They're not in a strong position. They are weakened as a national party right now. And I think Kevin McCarthy's trying to get to a deal. I don't know what happens. It's impossible to predict that. And the last thing I'll say is that Heather has asked about, who to give money to. I think it's, look, I don't envy any of you for figuring out what to do. I don't want to be in a position where I'm making recommendations because I don't have the time to go through and analyze which groups are effective. That's not something I'm ever going to be able to do with the kind of certainty that I feel it requires. So what I will say is this, right? Let me just give you, to close on, some basic fundamental guidelines, right? I like to fund into uncrowded spaces rather than crowded spaces. I like to go to the places where we aren't winning as opposed to where we are winning. Not, Hail Mary things where we can never win, but it's why I like, for example, at the presidential level, I like North Carolina. I think it's, it's the uncrowded space, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, there's going to be a lot of money going into those places. We know how to win there. We've done well there. But North Carolina, to me, is kind of the great presidential project this election. I also think that if you're looking at House and Senate races, your marginal dollar goes much further in a House race, and give directly to the candidates and to me, and not to intermediary organizations. I will be endorsing early next year some number of House races where I'm going to request people to give money, because I think winning the House back is essential. And I think your money is well spent there. Your money and your volunteer time is well spent there. It makes more of a difference in a House race than in a Senate race or a governor's race. And so I will be recommending that. And then beneath that, I'm going to be following very closely the Florida ballot initiative, it gets on the ballot. I think that's going to be deeply consequential. Florida's a state that I feel like we won in Jacksonville, and the road back, we are getting some confidence about getting back in competition there. I think that we're going to have a lot to do in the aftermath of the destructive DeSantis administration to be able to level the playing field there a little bit. I think this ballot initiative is really important for the people, for the center left and their Republican and pro-democracy allies to have a win and to reject the 6-week abortion ban that DeSantis has pushed there. So I think that really matters too. And there's a lot of other things that are going to matter a lot. And I'm not saying they're not important. They're just and then obviously my huge pitch for November is Virginia in whatever way you can help. And many of you are already working hard in Virginia, and thank you for that. But Virginia is the big one now, and it's where our priority, what I would like to do is every time I do make a recommendation, I don't want to give you a million things to do. I don't want to overwhelm you. I want to be very cautious and careful and conservative about what I recommend. And, Virginia to me is just all hands on deck. I mean, the Hopium cavalry, as Matt mentioned a few minutes ago, needs to come, here into Virginia and help the people of Virginia win this election. The stakes are enormous, national stakes around reproductive freedom. And it's just, we have to get this done. We have to do what we've done in these other races, pushed our performance to the upper end of what's possible in Virginia, the way that we have in so many other places this year. So let me conclude, everybody, by saying thank you. I'm a little tired today, as you can hear in my voice. I'm so happy to be in community with all of you, proud patriots who love your country, who are coming here because you don't want to let your democracy slip away. You want to make sure that freedom and democracy prevail here in America and everywhere else in the world. That's why you're here. And I'm just so grateful that you care about your country enough that you're spending, a Tuesday night with me here tonight, and for all the things that you do every day to make your country better and to prevent democracy from slipping away. We've had a really good run the last year and a half. We've kicked ass. We've outperformed all expectations. I'm really proud of all of you, but we have a lot of work ahead of us, and so yes, take the wins when they come, but use that to create energy around the work that's in front of us for the next 13 months. There's a lot of it, and it begins today in Virginia. Thanks, everybody. Keep working hard. And I'm just grateful again to be here in community here with you at Hopium Chronicles. Take care.